Shweta has been asking me for a while about doing a video on how to make naan bread. It's an East Indian bread, and it's Naan, naan, not Non, as in not a bread. It's naan bread. So I use this recipe, Madhur Jaffrey, and I've been using it for a lot of years now. First East Indian cookbook I ever bought was hers. And so, let me think, you start out with some warm milk. First thing you want to do is into the milk, we're going to put a little bit of sugar. Use caster sugar for this. Caster sugar is just a really fine sugar, and so it dissolves quickly. So 2 teaspoons of sugar. The sugar is just going to feed the yeast. And then we're going to put into there 2 teaspoons of just regular yeast, like active dry yeast. And so that's just going to sit for a few minutes, and it's going to get frothy, and we'll go ahead and put the rest of the stuff together. And by the time we've got that done, that should be good. So I've measured out here 450 grams of flour. And I've got this beautiful big bowl that I like using for bread making. We've got a bunch of bread makers in the parish. Half teaspoon of salt goes in with that. Teaspoon of baking powder. And so this is a really easy recipe, not hard to make at all. So that's a teaspoon of baking powder. And I'm just going to try to mix that around some, and then set that aside. In this bowl, I've got 150 milliliters of plain yogurt, and into that, I'm going to add an egg that I've whipped or just beaten, broken it up a little bit, and then I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of oil, a vegetable oil of some kind. And then I'm going to mix that around some. Our yeast isn't frothy enough yet, so that's just going to take a few minutes, a couple more minutes. Okay, our yeast has gotten a bit more frothy now, and so with this recipe, I tend to combine all my liquid, once I get to that point, combine all my liquid ingredients, mix them together some before I add the liquid to the dry. And then we're going to mix this up. We're going to knead it a bit, and then let it rise for a little bit. And some of baking bread just seems to be kind of by feel, because the humidity in the air, and there's so many different things that can seem to affect it, but you just do it, you get used to that. So I washed my hands earlier. I'm going to wash them again so I can get in there and knead. So after washing your hands, you get it to this point, and then we're just going to get it mixed until all of that flour is incorporated into the dough. And so it's a little bit messy at this point, but that's okay. It's going to get better as it mixes. Okay, so once I've got that all combined, then I'm going to flour a surface. I'm going to start kneading and mixing this bread. And right now, for what I want, it's a little bit too wet. So this is a chance that you can just keep adding a little bit more flour, work that flour into it, and eventually it's going to change. And unfortunately, it's, as I said earlier, part of bread is it's a bit of a sticky dough, this one, initially. But once we get kneading it, then it's going to change. So you'll notice that as it changes, there will be less and less of it stick to your hands. I should have gotten a scraper earlier. There. And so you knead it until it changes again, and it's that it goes soft and silky. As I say, it's more of a feel thing. It won't, when it's right, it's not going to stick to you, and it's going to feel well, by softer, it's like it's gotten a bit more puffy. But this dough, I think, especially because it's got the yogurt in it, it gets a really silky feel to it. Because I'm cheap or thrifty, I try to get every last little bit of dough and flour and ingredients that I can. So see, it's still a little bit stickier than I want, which means in this that I both want to add a bit more flour and that I haven't kneaded it enough yet. So if you do this recipe, for instance, in the winter time, when the humidity is a lot lower, then you're not going to have to add as much flour to the recipe. Which is kind of the same with pie pastry and all that sort of thing. I just give it a little bit more of a dusting with some flour. And then we're going to cover that and let it sit for a while, let it rest. It's going to rise some. And I think the recipe says about an hour. I find, again, in the summer, it's not likely going to take an hour. But we'll come back when that's. Once this has risen some, then we'll come back and divvy it up into little bits and make some the traditional shape and size naan bread pieces. So by now I think the bread has risen enough, and so I'm going to take this out, and we're going to break this into 6 pieces. Doesn't really matter how you do that. I find sometimes if I put it in a tubular shape, like a log, and then I cut it into thirds from there, roundabout. Well, those are pretty uneven, but anyway, that's not going to matter. You can tear it, do whatever you want to get it into 6 different pieces. And then, let me think, for flattening it out, you can just flatten it out with your hand, like that. And depending on how thin you make it, that affects the consistency of the end product. So I can also take a rolling pin and roll it out some, but I don't want to make it too thin, because you can roll this out and really thin, and I've done this before. You can also use this recipe to make like a cracker. So roll it out and cut it into shapes and bake it, and it'll be a really nice cracker. But I want to end up tonight with something that's a little bit more like actual bread. And so I tend to just flatten it out with my hand. Sometimes I'll go at it with a rolling pin if I think it's a bit too uneven. But you can just do it here. I believe traditionally they're more oval or tear shaped. So I get these all ready. So to do it by hand, of course, I'm just using principally the heel of my hand to get it out into stretch it out some. And this, just if you want it a bit more bready, so I stretch it to about that thickness, and because interestingly, it's going to puff up quite a bit. So the oven I've heated up to around 425, and I've got this cast iron griddle that I put in the oven, and it doesn't take too long for these to bake at all. So there are several ways you can do this, which I'm going to show you that. So I just lay them out on my cast iron griddle, and do be careful because everything is very hot, and it's not going to take that long. So I'll set the timer maybe for 3 minutes, and partly just to remind myself to not forget about them. And so that's one way of doing them. In the summertime, I don't cook inside at all. I do all my cooking outside, and so I've got a wood oven out there as well, and that's where if I have to do any kind of baking or things like that in the summer, that's where I tend to do that. So these don't take too terribly long, and I've also got to stir. I've got chicken and onion on the stove at the same time. I'm doing a curry tonight, and in here I've got fennel, cumin seed, turmeric. I've got ginger and garlic, fresh ginger and garlic in the pan already. Garam masala, some chili peppers, chili pepper flakes, some cinnamon. I can't remember what all else. I think that's about it. And so it's a nice mix. So I got to get that on my chicken. So pardon me for a minute. it hasn't been 3 minutes, and those are, I can show you here, so those are already getting kind of brown on the one side, and so that has only been at 2 minutes, what, a minute 50, something like that. So it's a fast recipe. Better check those again. They need a bit more time on that side. So I'll set the timer maybe for 2 minutes. Oh, I was going to say another way that you can do these, of course, is preheat your oven, and then when you put the naan in, and if you don't have like a cast iron griddle, I used to do this with a cast iron frying pan. You could do it on a baking sheet, but your baking sheet has to be able to take high heat. So another way we can do this is stick it on your broil, say 425 on broil, but you really got to keep an eye on it. And I've got it on the top shelf. So that's just another way to brown them up. They will likely balloon up. Sometimes some of them do. So you just keep an eye on them, and there's going to be a different smell. It's going to smell kind of toasty. But I would say this is what I shoot for to call it done. And once it cools a bit, it's going to be a really nice, soft, chewy bread in the middle and a really crunchy texture exterior. And so I will butter them up, and those with some cheese and some red wine or white wine, any kind of wine really, are really quite great. I also do these in the outdoor oven, and we'll go do that now. So this is my outdoor cooking space, and so this is where I do all my cooking through the summer, the hot weather months. And so I've got a good fire going. This oven, I've right now got at a much higher temperature than my indoor oven. So right now this one's around, I guess probably 650. So you can put either like a heavy cast iron, something or other in here. You got to have something that's thick enough to stand the high heat. And right now I happen to have a stone in there. So I'm just going to throw them in there for a quick minute. And so this is a way you can do this sort of thing in the summer when you don't want to have to turn your indoor oven on. You can also do these on the barbecue. Same thing, just put your heavy griddle of some kind on the barbecue, get it up to a good temperature. And so there's all sorts of ways it's a really great recipe that way. I'm more careful with them in this oven at this temperature because everything just happens so fast at that high a temperature. So they've started to brown up on that one side. And you can see how they're starting to puff up quite a bit too. Of course, every time you open the door on any oven, you lose heat. But as I said, I'm just much more nervous about these. They're more careful about it at a higher temperature like this. So I would call those about done. And so, let me get a glove. And so, got a nice brown golden crust on them. So that's my naan bread recipe. Well, how I do naan bread, and you can do it either conventional oven in the house. You can do it on the barbecue. You can do it stovetop, I suppose, for that matter, or you can do it in an outdoor oven. It's a really great recipe because you can make it like a bread, or you can roll it out thin and make it into crackers, and it's such a rich, great flavor. Thanks for watching.